The Stealthy School of Criticism. Your paragraph a fortnight ago relating to the pseudonymous authorship of an article, violently assailing myself and other writers of poetry in the Contemporary Review for October last, reveals a species of critical masquerade which I have expressed in the heading given to this letter. Since then, Mr. Sidney Colvin's note qualifying the report that he intends to answer that article has appeared in your pages, and my own view as to the absolute forfeit under such conditions of all claim to honorable reply is precisely the same as Mr. Colvin's, for here a critical organ, professedly adopting the principle of open signature, would seem, in reality, to assert by silent practice, however not by enunciation, that if the anonymous in criticism was, as itself originally inculcated, but in early caterpillar stage, the nominate too is found to be no better than a homely transitional chrysalis, and that the ultimate butterfly form for a critic who likes to sport in sunlight and yet to elude the grasp is after all the pseudonymous. But indeed, what I may call the Siamese aspect of the entertainment provided by the review will elicit but one verdict, yet I may perhaps, as the individual chiefly attacked, be excused for asking your assistance now in giving a specific denial to specific charges which, if unrefuted, may still continue in spite of the author's strategic fiasco to serve his purpose against me to some extent. The primary accusation on which this writer grounds all the rest seems to be that others and myself extol fleshliness as the distinct and supreme end of poetic and pictorial art, aver that poetic expression is greater than poetic thought, and by inference that the body is greater than the soul and sound superior to sense. As my own writings are alone formally dealt with in the article, I shall confine my answer to myself, and this must first take unavoidably the form of a challenge to prove so broad a statement. It is true, some fragmentary pretense at proof is put in here and there throughout the attack, and thus far an opportunity is given of contesting the assertion. A sonnet entitled Nuptial Sleep is quoted and abused at page 338 of the review, and is there dwelt upon as a whole poem describing merely animal sensations. It is no more a whole poem in reality than is any single stanza of any poem throughout the book. The poem, written chiefly in sonnets, and of which this is one sonnet stanza, is entitled The House of Life, and even in my first published installment of the whole work, as contained in the volume under notice, ample evidence is included that no such passing phrase of description as the one-headed nuptial sleep could possibly be put forward by the author of The House of Life as his own representative view of the subject of love. In proof of this, I will direct attention among the love sonnets of this poem to numbers 2, 8, 11, 17, 28, and more specifically 13, which indeed I had better print here. Love Sweetness. Sweet dimness of her loosened hair's downfall about thy face, her sweet hands round thy head in gracious fostering union garlanded, her tremulous smiles, her glances sweet recall of love, her murmuring sighs memorial, her mouth's cold sweetness by thy kisses shed on cheeks and neck and eyelids, and so led back to her mouth which answers there for all. What sweeter than these things, except the thing in lacking which all these would lose their sweet, the confident heart's still fervor, the swift beat and soft subsidence of the spirit's wing, that then when it feels in cloud-girt wayfaring, the breath of kindred plumes against its feet. Any reader may bring an artistic charge he pleases against the above sonnet, but one charge it would be impossible to maintain against the writer of the series in which it occurs, and that is the wish on his part to assert that the body is greater than the soul. For here all the passionate and just delights of the body are declared, somewhat figuratively it is true, but unmistakably, to be as naught if not ennobled by the concurrence of the soul at all times. Moreover, nearly one half of this series of sonnets has nothing to do with love, but treats of quite other life influences. I would defy anyone to couple with fair quotation of sonnets 28, 30, 31, 39, 40, 41, 43, or others, the slander that their author was not impressed, like all other thinking men, with the responsibilities and higher mysteries of life, while sonnets 35, 36, and 37, entitled The Choice, sum up the general view taken in a manner only to be evaded by conscious insincerity. Thus much for the house of life, of which the sonnet Nuptial Sleep is one stanza embodying. For its small constituent share, a beauty of natural universal function, only to be reprobated in art if dwelt on, as I have shown that it is not here, to the exclusion of those other highest things of which it is the harmonious concomitant. At page 342, an attempt is made to stigmatize four short quotations as being especially my own property, that is, for the context shows the meaning, as being grossly sensual, though all guiding reference to any precise page or poem in my book is avoided here. The first of these unspecified quotations is from the last confession, and is a description referring to the harlot's laugh, the hideous character of which, together with its real or imagined resemblance to the laugh heard soon afterwards from the lips of one long cherished as an ideal, is the immediate cause which makes the maddened hero of the poem a murderer. Assailants may say what they please, but no poet or poetic reader will blame me for making the incident recorded in these 7 lines as repulsive to the reader as it was to the hearer and beholder. Without this, the chain of motive and result would remain obviously incomplete. Observe also that these are but 7 lines in a poem of some 500, not one other of which could be classed with them. A second quotation gives the last 2 lines only of the following sonnet, which is the first of 4 sonnets in the House of Life, jointly entitled Widowhood. I sat with love upon a woodside well, leaning across the river, he and I and he, nor ever did he speak nor looked at me, but touched his lute wherein was audible the certain secret thing he had to tell. Only our mirrored eyes met silently in the low wave, and that sound seemed to be the passionate voice I knew, and my tears fell, and all their fall his eyes beneath grew hers, and with his foot and with his wing feathers he swept the spring that watered my heart's drouth. Then the dark ripples spread to waving hair, and as I stooped, her own lips rising there bubbled with brimming kisses at my mouth. The critic has quoted, as I said, only the last 2 lines, and he has italicized the second as something unbearable and ridiculous. Of course, the inference would be that this was really my own absurd bubble and squeak notion of an actual kiss. The reader will perceive at once from the whole sonnet transcribed above how untrue such an inference would be. The sonnet describes a dream or trance of divided love momentarily reunited by the longing fancy, and in the imagery of the dream, the face of the beloved rises through deep dark waters to kiss the lover. Thus the phrase bubbled with brimming kisses, etc. bears purely on the special symbolism employed, and from that point of view will be found, I believe, perfectly simple and just. A third quotation is from Eden Bower and says, "What more prize than love to impel thee? Grip and lip my limbs as I tell thee." Here again no reference is given, and naturally the reader would suppose that a human embrace is described. The embrace, on the contrary, is that of a fabled snake woman and a snake. It would be possible still, no doubt, to object on other grounds to this conception, but the ground inferred and relied on for full effect by the critic is nonetheless an absolute misrepresentation. These 3 extracts, it will be admitted, are virtually, though not verbally, garbled with malicious intention, and the same is the case, as I have shown, with the sonnet called Nuptial Sleep, when purposely treated as a whole poem. The last of the 4 quotations grouped by the critic as conclusive examples consists of 2 lines from Jenny. Neither some 13 years ago when I wrote this poem, nor last year when I published it, did I fail to foresee impending charges of recklessness and aggressiveness, or to perceive that even some among those who could really read the poem and acquit me on these grounds might still hold that the thought in it had better have dispensed with the situation which serves it for framework. Nor did I omit to consider how far a treatment from without might here be possible. But the motive powers of art reverse the requirement of science, and demand first of all an inner standing point. The heart of such a mystery as this must be plucked from the very world in which it beats or bleeds, and the beauty and pity, the self-questionings and all questionings which it brings with it, can come with full force only from the mouth of one alive to its whole appeal, such as the speaker put forward in the poem, that is, of a young and thoughtful man of the world. To such a speaker, many half-cynical revulsions of feeling and reverie, and a recurrent presence of the impressions of beauty, however artificial, which first brought him within such a circle of influence, would be inevitable features of the dramatic relation portrayed. Here again I can give the lie, in hearing of honest readers, to the base or trivial ideals which my critic labors to connect with the poem. There is another little charge, however, which this minstrel of mufti brings against Jenny, namely one of plagiarism from that very poetic self of his, which the tutelary prose does but enshroud for the moment. This question can fortunately be settled with ease by others who have read my critic's poems, and thus I need the less regret that, not happening myself to be in that position, I must be content to rank with those who cannot pretend to an opinion on the subject. It would be humiliating, need one come to serious detail, to have to refute such an accusation as that of binding oneself by solemn league and covenant to extol fleshliness as the distinct and supreme end of poetic and pictorial art, and one cannot feel that here everyone will think it allowable merely to pass by with a smile the foolish fellow who has brought a charge thus framed against any reasonable man. Indeed, what I have said already is substantially enough to refute it, even did I not feel sure that a fair balance of my poetry must of itself do so in the eyes of every candid reader. I say nothing of my pictures, but those who know them will laugh at the idea that I may nevertheless take a wider view than some poets or critics of how much in the material conditions absolutely given to man to deal with as distinct from his spiritual aspirations is admissible within the limits of art. That is, I say, is possible enough, nor do I wish to shrink from such responsibility, but to state that I do so to the ignoring or overshadowing of spiritual beauty is an absolute falsehood, impossible to be put forward except in the indulgence of prejudice or rancor. I have selected, amid much railing on my critic's part, what seemed the most representative indictment against me, and have so far answered it. Its remaining clauses set forth how others than myself aver that poetic expression is greater than poetic thought, and sound superior to sense. An accusation elsewhere, I observe, expressed by saying that we wish to create form for its own sake. If writers of verse are to be listened to in such arraignment of each other, it might be quite competent to me to prove from the works of my friends in question that no such thing is the case with them. But my present function is to confine myself to my own defense. This again it is difficult to do quite seriously. It is no part of my undertaking to dispute the verdict of any contemporary, however contemptuous or contemptible, on my own measure of executive success, but the accusation cited above is not against the poetic value of certain work, but against its primary and, by assumption, its admitted aim. And to this I must reply that so far, assuredly, not even Shakespeare himself could desire more arduous human tragedy for development in art than belongs to the themes I venture to embody, however incalculably higher might be his power of dealing with them. What more inspiring for poetic effort than the terrible love turned to hate, perhaps the deadliest of all passion-woven complexities, which is the theme of Sister Helen, and in a more fantastic form of Eden Bower, the surrounding of both poems being the mere machinery of a central universal meaning. What again, more so than the savage penalty exacted for a lost ideal, as expressed in the last confession, than the outraged love for man and burning compensations in art and memory of Dante at Verona, than the baffling problems which the face of Jenny conjures up, or than the analysis of passion and feeling attempted in the House of Life, and others among the more purely lyrical poems. I speak here, as does my critic in the clause adduced, of aim, not of achievement, and so far the mere summary is instantly subversive of the preposterous imputation. To assert that the poet whose matter is such as this aims chiefly at creating form for its own sake is, in fact, almost an ingenuous kind of dishonesty, for surely it delivers up the assertor at once, bound hand and foot, to the tender mercies of contradictory proof. Yet this may fairly be taken as an example of the spirit in which a constant effort is here made against me to appeal to those who either are ignorant of what I write, or else belong to the large class too easily influenced by an assumption of authority in addressing them. The false name appended to the article must, as is evident, aid this position vastly, for who, after all, would not be apt to laugh at seeing one poet confessedly come forward as aggressor against another in the field of criticism? It would not be worthwhile to lose time and patience in noticing minutely how the system of misrepresentation is carried into points of artistic detail, giving us, for example, such statements as that the burden employed in the ballad of Sister Helen is repeated with little or no alteration through 34 verses, whereas the fact is that the alteration of it in every verse is the very scheme of the poem. But these are minor matters quite thrown into the shade by the critic's more daring sallies. In addition to the class of attack I have answered above, the article contains, of course, an immense amount of personal paltriness, as, for instance, attributions of my work to this, that, or the other observed derivative source, or again, pure nonsense, which can have no real meaning even to the writer, about one art getting hold of another and imposing on it its conditions and limitations, or indeed what not besides. However, to such antics as this, no more attention is possible than that which Virgil enjoined Dante to bestow on the meaner phenomena of his pilgrimage. Thus far, then, let me thank you for the opportunity afforded me to join issue with the Stealthy school of criticism. As for any literary injustice to be done on this particular Mr. Robert Thomas, I will merely ask the reader whether, once identified, he does not become manifestly his own best sworn tormentor, for who will then fail to discern all the palpitations which preceded his final resolve in the great question whether or not to be his acknowledged self when he became an assailant, and yet this is he who, from behind his mask, ventures to charge another with bad blood, with insincerity, and the rest of it, and that where poetic fancies are alone in question, while every word on his own tongue is covert rancor, and every stroke from his pen perversion of truth. Yet, after all, there is nothing wonderful in the lengths to which a fretful poet-critic will carry such grudges as he may bear, while publisher and editor can both be found who are willing to consider such means admissible, even to the clear subversion of first professed tenets in the review which they conduct. In many phases of outward nature, the principle of chaff and grain holds good, the base enveloping the precious continually, but an untruth was never yet the husk of a truth. Thresh and riddle and winnow it as you may, let it fly in shreds to the four winds, falsehood only will be that which flies and that which stays, and thus the sheath of deceit which this pseudonymous undertaking presents at the outset ensures in fact what will be found to be its real character to the core.